I grew up in a quiet corner of northern Ohio, where the loudest thing most days was the old AC unit humming in our living room, and the sound of my mom reminding me to clean my room before dinner. And honestly, life felt pretty simple back then, like the kind of life where you know everybody on block and every neighbor waves, even when they do not remember your name. And I always thought that was normal, the way people stuck around each other, the way routines just kept going, as if nothing could ever shake them. But I guess we all learn eventually that stability is just a polite illusion, waiting for the right moment to split open. My dad was the type of man who came home tired from work, but still tried to smile for us, even though his job at the auto parts plant drained the life out of him day after day. And my mom was the kind of woman who turned every leftover into a miracle dinner, and every argument into a family meeting, and every Saturday into a cleanup project that none of us asked for but all of us accepted. And then there was my older brother, Trevor, who liked to pretend he was too cool for the rest of us, but still sat with me at night, playing old video games when he thought nobody would notice. And then there was me, the kid who watched everyone carefully, because I always felt like there was something important hidden between the moments, the way people talked, the way they paused, the way their eyes looked different when they thought nobody was paying attention. I guess you could say I was the family observer, and maybe that is why I remember the night everything changed with such ridiculous clarity. It was late on a Tuesday, the kind of night when the air feels heavier than usual, like it is waiting for something to happen. And the house was quiet except for dishwasher running and the soft creak of the hallway floorboards when someone walked across them. And I was in my room trying to finish a book for English class, even though my eyes kept drooping, and I kept rereading the same paragraph over and over. And then I heard raised voices from downstairs, not yelling exactly, but tense, sharp, clipped, like they were trying to keep the conversation from turning into something bigger. I crept to the top of the stairs, because that is what I always did when something felt off, and I could hear my parents talking. My mom sounded nervous, my dad sounded frustrated, but controlled, like he was weighing every word in his mouth before letting it go. And I could only make out pieces, something about money, something about a change at work, something about needing to tell us soon. And even though I did not understand the details, I understood the mood. And the mood was wrong, very wrong. The thing is, moments like that stick to you, even when you do not know why they matter, yet they cling to your memory like they know they are going to become important later. And as I crouched on the stairs back, pressed to the banister, heart pounding for reasons I could not explain, I felt it, something shifting, something cracking, something starting. And I had no idea how big the fallout would become. And that was before the night everything truly flipped upside down, before the decision that changed all of us forever. And what happened next was something I absolutely never saw coming. After that night, the one where I crouched on the staircase listening to voices that sounded like they were carrying the weight of the whole world, something in our house felt different, even if nobody wanted to admit it. Mornings used to be loud and a little chaotic, with my mom frying eggs while reminding Trevor to grab his backpack, and my dad rushing out the door with travel coffee in hand. But now everything felt quieter, like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for someone to say whatever needed to be said, even though none of us knew what that was supposed to be. Dad started leaving earlier than usual, slipping out before the sun had fully climbed up, and he would give this short, tight smile whenever I happened to catch him on the way out. And he would say, "Hey champ, have a good day," in this voice that felt practiced, like someone reading lines from a script. And I would nod and pretend not to notice the deep lines around his eyes that had not been there before. Mom moved slower too, moving through the house like she was keeping herself busy to avoid thinking about something. And Trevor acted like nothing was wrong, which only made it more obvious that something was definitely wrong, because he never missed a chance to stir up drama. Unless the drama scared him, school did not feel like a break anymore, either, because I kept replaying what I heard, even though it was not much, just fragments, soft words, sharp edges, things I was not supposed to understand, and yet could not forget. Money, changes, decisions, tell them soon, all these pieces rattling around in my head like loose coins in a dryer, and I kept wondering what it meant for us, because we were not the kind of family that had surprises or secrets, or at least I never thought we were until that night one afternoon about a week later. Mom asked me to help her bring the groceries inside, and I could tell she was trying to act normal, but her eyes kept darting toward the driveway, as if expecting Dad to show up, even though she knew he would not be home for hours. And we put the bags on the counter, and she said, "Sweetie, how are you doing?" in this voice that was too soft and too gentle and too careful. And I shrugged because I did not know how to answer, and she nodded like she understood anyway. And then she said, "Your dad has been going through a lot at work lately, and we are trying to work through things as a family." And I wanted to ask a million questions, but I swallowed them because she looked like she could fall apart if I said the wrong thing later. That night Trevor barged into my room, which he rarely did without complaining first, and he flopped onto my bed staring at the ceiling and said, "Do you think they are getting divorced?" And the way he said it made my stomach twist, because hearing it out loud made it feel real. I told him, "No, I don't think so," but the truth was I had no idea. And neither did he, and we just lay there in this weird silence that felt heavier than anything we had ever dealt with before, because it was the kind of silence that comes only when something big is coming, something you cannot stop no matter how hard you want to. And that was when the phone rang downstairs and Mom answered it, and her voice cracked in a way I had never heard before, and I knew instantly, without understanding, how that nothing in our house would be the same after that call. And if I had known what news she heard that night, I might have run out of the house before everything exploded. The moment my mom's voice cracked on that phone call, something inside me tightened like a rope getting pulled too hard, and I could hear her trying to steady herself as she spoke in this trembling half-whisper that carried through the entire house, even though she was in the kitchen, and I was upstairs, and Trevor was frozen beside me, like someone had pressed pause on him. We both knew something serious was happening, because our mom never sounded like that, not even on the worst days. So when she finally hung up the phone and called our names, we moved without talking, without thinking, like we were being pulled by gravity. When we got downstairs, she was standing by the counter, gripping the edge like she needed it to stay upright, her face pale, her eyes too shiny. And she said, "Boys, sit down please," and her voice had that soft breaking edge that told me she was trying to keep herself from crying, and that whatever she was about to say was going to change our lives in a way we could not undo. And she took this long shaky breath before telling us that Dad had been injured at work, and he was at the hospital, and they needed us to go there right now. It felt like my brain jammed on the word injured, because it was too vague, too open, too dangerous, and I wanted to ask what kind of injury and how bad it was, and why the hospital called instead of Dad. But the questions got stuck somewhere between my stomach and my throat, and Trevor, who always had something to say, could not get anything out either, and Mom just grabbed her keys and said, "We need to go now," and so we went. Drive to the hospital felt unreal, like the world outside the car was moving too fast, while we were trapped inside something slow and thick. The highway lights smeared across the windshield, and Mom kept wiping her eyes, even though she tried to hide it, and Trevor kept shaking his leg like, if he stopped moving even for a second, he would fall apart. And I kept thinking about the conversation I heard on the stairs, the money, the changes, the pressure. And suddenly it all made this terrible sense in my head, like a puzzle, snapping together in the worst possible way. When we got to the hospital, air smelled like antiseptic and fear, the way hospitals always do, and a nurse led us down a hallway to a small waiting room, where everything felt too white and too bright and too quiet, and Mom kept pacing, while Trevor sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like he was trying to burn a hole in it. And I just kept listening for footsteps, for doors opening, for someone to tell us something, anything. And after what felt like forever, a doctor finally walked in. He looked serious in a calm, professional way, but his eyes gave him away. They looked tired and heavy, and he said my dad's name in this gentle, careful tone that made my chest clench, and he explained that there had been an accident with one of the machines at the plant, and Dad had been caught in it, and they got him out, but there were complications and he was in surgery, and they were doing everything they could. But it was critical, and the world tilted in this slow sinking way like the floor had dropped a few inches without warning. Mom covered her mouth with her hands like she was trying to hold in a sound that was too painful to let out, and Trevor stood up so fast his chair crashed back against the wall, and I felt this wave of cold rush through me, because critical meant serious, and serious meant dangerous, and dangerous meant maybe not coming home, and suddenly nothing felt steady anymore. The world felt loose, broken, fragile, like one wrong move could shatter everything we had left. And then the doctor said something else, something that made my heart slam against my ribs so hard it hurt. Because the accident was not just an accident, and the truth about it was about to rip our family wide open. The doctor hesitated before explaining the rest, and that hesitation alone made my stomach twist, because adults only pause like that when they are about to deliver news that tears something apart inside you. And he said there had been signs for weeks that the machine my dad worked on was malfunctioning, and that management had been warned, but the warnings were ignored because shutting it down would cost time and money, and the plant was already behind schedule, so they kept it running. And I felt this rush of heat in my face, because I knew my dad would never let something unsafe slide, not if he could help it. And the doctor nodded like he could see the realization in our eyes, and he said, "Your father tried to shut it down himself when it jammed." And that was when the accident happened. My mom sank into a chair like her legs had given up on her, and Trevor slammed his fist into the arm of the couch. And the doctor kept talking, trying to say things gently, but every word landed like a blow. Decisions, liability, investigations, none of it felt real, none of it felt connected to the man who sat at our dinner table every night, telling us to keep our grades up and cracking jokes when the room felt too heavy. And all I could think was how hard he worked, how late he stayed, how tired he always was, and how unfair it was that doing the right thing could cost him everything. Hours dragged by in the waiting room, slow and heavy like wet cement. And every time the door opened, we all jerked our heads up hoping it was someone with good news. And every time it was, the hope inside me cracked a little more. Mom walked back and forth, making these tiny noises under her breath, not words, just sounds, like she was fighting to stay together. Trevor kept tapping his fingers on the chair arm faster and faster, until I grabbed his hand, because the sound was making both of us more nervous than we already were, and he let me hold it, which told me just how scared he really was. Finally, just when I thought I could not sit still another second, the surgical team came out, and one of the doctors asked to speak with us privately, and my mom's whole body stiffened, and Trevor let out this low, shaky breath, and we followed them down a small hallway into a room with dim lighting and a single table and 3 chairs. And I hated that room instantly, because it felt like the kind of place where people only go to hear the worst news of their lives. The doctor spoke softly, explaining that my dad had lost a lot of blood, that they had to work fast to stabilize him, and that they managed to get him through the surgery. But there was damage, serious damage, and he would be moved to intensive care. And the next 24 hours were crucial. And I realized I had been holding my breath, because when he said he made it through, I felt my lungs finally pull in air. Even though the rest of it sounded terrifying, we were allowed to see him, but only for a moment. And when we stepped into the room, I almost did not recognize him, because he looked smaller, somehow weaker, like the accident had drained all the strength out of him. And machines surrounded the bed, blinking and humming and making this steady rhythm that did not feel steady at all. And Mom touched his hand gently and whispered something to him, even though he couldn't hear it. And Trevor stood on the other side of the bed, staring at Dad, like he was trying to memorize every detail in case he needed it later. And I felt this ache rising in my throat, because this was not supposed to happen to us, not to our family, not like this. And that was before the union rep arrived, before he told us what the company was planning to do next. And what he said made my mom's face turn from fear to pure furious fire. The union representative who showed up at the hospital looked exhausted like someone who had been fighting a war on paper and losing most of the battles, and he shook my mom's hand and then leaned in close, speaking in a low, steady voice that made every hair on my arms stand up, and he said the company was already preparing a statement, and that statement was going to claim the accident was my dad's fault, that he had ignored safety procedures, that he had acted recklessly, and that the liability was on him, not on them. And for a moment it felt like the whole room spun around me, because it was impossible to believe anyone could say something so cruel and so backwards about a man who had spent his entire life doing everything the right way. My mom stared at the union rep like she could not even process what he was saying at first, and then something inside her snapped into place, and the fear in her eyes burned away, leaving only this fierce, determined fire that I had never seen before. And she said, "No, absolutely not, that is not happening." And her voice was steady, powerful, even though her hands were shaking at her sides. And Trevor stepped forward too, and said there is no way Dad would ever ignore safety rules. He practically lived by them. And I stood beside them, because even though I was terrified, I knew this was something we had to face together. The union rep nodded slowly and said he believed us because my dad had reported that machine more than once, and he had documented it, and he had signed his name on the forms, and all of that was supposed to protect him. But management had buried the reports to keep production moving, and now they were trying to twist the story before anyone discovered the truth. And I felt anger rise inside me, hot and heavy, because my dad risked everything trying to fix their mistake, and now they wanted to blame him for being hurt by it. We spent the next days in a fog of hospital visits, tense phone calls, and whispered conversations in hallways filled with tired families and blinking monitors. And every time we visited Dad, I kept hoping he would open his eyes just once, just long enough to hear Mom tell him we were fighting for him. But he stayed still and quiet, his chest rising and falling with the help of the machines. And the three of us stood there day after day, feeling like we were waiting for the outcome of a battle we didn't even know how to fight. Then, on the fifth day, Mom met with a lawyer, someone the union recommended, and he laid everything out for us: the reports, the ignored warnings, the timelines, the company statements, the upcoming investigation. And he said we had a strong case, a very strong case, but it would not be easy because the company had money and lawyers and resources, and we had fear and exhaustion and a man in a hospital bed who had trusted the wrong people for too long. And for a moment I wondered how we were supposed to go up against all that, but then Mom said, "We will do it, we will fight this." And she said it with the kind of strength that made even the lawyer pause. Trevor and I backed her all the way, because Dad deserved better than lies and excuses. And we knew it, and deep down, even in the fear, I knew Dad would have fought for us too. And that thought kept me steady when everything else felt like it was falling apart around us. Weeks passed, and Dad slowly began to wake up, not fully, not clearly, but enough to squeeze Mom's hand one morning, enough to turn his head slightly when Trevor spoke, enough to let me know he was still there, fighting in his own quiet way. And when Mom finally told him gently, carefully, about the accident, about the investigation, about the company blaming him, he blinked slowly and shook his head, the smallest, tiniest movement. But it was enough to tell us he understood, and that he trusted us to keep going. And we did. We stood by him every step, through every meeting, every document, every challenge, and we refused to let the truth be buried again, because it wasn't just about the accident anymore. It was about what was right, and what was fair, and what a family does when the world tries to break them. And that is how everything changed. How we stopped being just a family living in a quiet Ohio neighborhood, and became something stronger, something unshakable. Because when the world tried to crush us, we learned exactly who we were and what happened after that. Well, that was the part none of us were ready for.